Recording in progress.
Go ahead, please.
Come on up. Thank you all for joining us. We appreciate the time taken to reflect on this really important issue. This has been a very, very difficult time for many Palestinian Canadians, Muslim Canadians, for the past 3 weeks here in Canada. We have had to call our friends and families, many of our community members who have not only been devastated by the actions and what has taken place in Gaza, in Palestine, but the fact that many of our own community members have lost countless numbers of their own relatives. So without further ado, I'll get started. I'm joined by members of the Palestinian community and the Muslim community to discuss this as well. My name is Ahmad Al-Qadi. I work with the Justice for All Canada. We're a human rights nonprofit organization that primarily focuses on combating genocide. So right now, it's about 6:26 in Gaza right now in Palestine. For many of us here in Canada, this would normally be the time where we might be eating dinner with our friends, might be spending time with our families. For children and young adults, they might be doing homework or, studying for a test, any number of things that an average civilian should be entitled to do. However, this is not the case in Gaza right now. Right now, as we speak, it is time for every single Palestinian civilian in Gaza to prepare for another night spent with no fuel, no food, no water, and no electricity as a result of the total blockade done by Israel. At this time, Palestinians in Gaza must wade through the darkness of a city turned to ash and rubble, a city that was once beautiful and vibrant with life. But right now, Palestinians are hoping and praying that the hundreds of bombs targeting civilians, do not reach them or their families. And the days bleed into the night only because of the hundreds of explosions engulfing Gaza into flames. And honestly, who can sleep under such circumstances? When we talk about 8,000 people, over 8,000 civilians killed in a matter of 3 weeks, when we talk about over 2,360 children killed in a matter of 3 weeks, this is not an abstract number. These were 8,000 people with hopes and dreams. They were mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, children. They were just like your average Canadian. And we have truly struggled to see how our government could ever take such a laissez-faire approach to a massacre that has left over 8,000 dead and counting. Members of Parliament, instead of standing against the violence, have given a carte blanche for Israel to do as it pleases, despite the fact that Israel's president said there are no innocent civilians in Gaza, despite the fact that he said Israel would do whatever it takes to win, despite the fact that the Israeli defense minister called Palestinians human animals. What we have seen in essence these past 3 weeks is a mass propaganda campaign targeted at stripping Palestinians of their humanity in order to justify a war against civilians and war crimes, and that is exactly what happened. They have attacked and murdered thousands of civilians with impunity. What has been the government's response to these dreadful actions? The call for a humanitarian pause. Is that what civilians deserve, who have done nothing wrong, to take a coffee break before jumping right back into being butchered? We know diplomacy is difficult. We know diplomacy is hard, but our asks are simple. What Canadians are asking for is simple: that Canada takes a moral, humane approach to a conflict that has left over 8,000 civilians dead. So number one, Canada must call for a ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire, to halt the violence and protect civilian lives in Gaza, West Bank, and Israel. Every single civilian deserves to live a peaceful life, no matter where they are. Advocate for the establishment of a humanitarian corridor to ensure the safe delivery of essential aid, medical supplies, and support to the affected Gaza population. Number three, Canada must evaluate its decision to recognize the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction in investigating the Israeli government for war crimes. And lastly, Canada must review its supply arms and weapons to Israel, ensuring they are not used in ways that violate international law and contribute to the killing of innocent civilians. As an ally to Israel, Canada should be working with both sides to ensure that human rights violations and war crimes are not committed. Canada should do everything in its power to ensure that civilian casualties are minimized. Instead, truthfully, what we can observe is that civilians have been the primary target in Gaza. We know that our government can do better, and it must do better. We call on all our members of parliament to action our listed items for the sake of preserving innocent life. And with that, I will leave it to our delegates and speakers. I'll now invite Habib Khoury of the Association of Palestinian Arab Canadians to speak.
Thank you. Thank you. Today I'm here with mixed emotions. I prepared something to say, but at the same time, I always have been known in my community to speak from the heart, so I'm going to be jumping all over the place. You need to recognize that for the first time as a Palestinian, we're faced with not only having to defend our people in Gaza amidst the occupation and atrocities that have been committed daily, but also to defend our rights as Palestinian Canadians, a position that I do not envy us as a community to be going through. My own identity as a Canadian and what I offered this country and what my parents offered this country has been put into question. And that's what's tearing us apart. I will not disclose my real job right now as a health worker because I am afraid as a Palestinian, unfortunately, of the rising Palestinian racism here in Ottawa and across the country. It is an anti-Palestinian racism. That's what it should be called. I'm here as a Palestinian Canadian. I'm an active member of the Coalition of Palestinian Canadian Associations in Canada that encompasses 26 organizations. I'm also here on behalf of the Association of Palestinian Canadians, Arab Canadians in Ottawa, also known as APAC. I'm the founder and the race director of the charity Race of Ottawa Run for Palestine that supports children of Gaza who suffer from PTSD and have been suffering from PTSD. This is not the first round of aggression. It has been ongoing in Gaza, who's been under siege for 16 years, and at the greater occupation of 46 years to the rest of the occupied areas. I'm also a very active member of the Palestinian Canadian Christian community here in Ottawa. So with that privilege, I have many contacts, and I reach out to many people within my communities. I'm always sought after to offer help, counseling, encouragement, support, and be a voice to speak for the people who are and cannot speak. We have seen many incidents of the rise of this anti-Palestinian racism in Ottawa, thanks to our own Prime Minister and to many levels of governmental organizations who in their speeches called us as terrorist glorifying individuals who live here in Ottawa for going out on the streets to mourn our loved ones, to talk about the aggression, to criticize Israel for what it needs to be criticized for, its actions. Its actions towards people who are civilian, who are bare, who are fighting years of occupation, years of siege, who can put people into a 14-kilometer square feet, the size of Gatineau, into complete darkness and bomb them and shell them and not having or giving them the right to communicate with the rest of the world. I was just sitting with more than 10 families in Ottawa who lost anywhere between 3 to 50 members of their own family here in Ottawa alone. I'm in touch with many similar families, Canadian Palestinian families who've lost similar numbers across each and every single city here in Canada. Where is the letter of cares that the federal employees received from the clerk? Did they include Palestinians? No. We are creating a second-class citizenship here in Canada, and we will not and we should not allow this to happen. We are people who are hardworking. We are people with aspirations our parents and our families brought us here after years of forced displacement, of wars that took place in '67, and then later on the effect of the occupation on the daily living of Palestinians. We sought refuge in other countries who were not up to the aspirations of providing a life for the children, just like any other parents would want. We came to Canada because once it was the beacon of hope and light and stood up for human rights and defending them. We did not come here to be sided. We did not here to be stepped upon. We did not come here to be dehumanized. We did not come here to experience what our people in Palestine under the occupation has been subjective to, which is collective punishment. What's happening here is racism, is discrimination, is collective punishment, and the world needs to wake up to this. Criticizing the occupation, criticizing Zionism is not the same as being an anti-Semitic. By the way, we as Palestinians are Semites, if you want to check our DNA. This sentiment of disappointment, alienation, dehumanization, and discrimination, we witness rising incidents of anti-Palestinian racism across the country, and we've seen that at the different levels of the governmental bodies here in Ottawa. Like a mayor, the mayor's job should be urban planning, should be fostering diversity, should be inclusive, should be spreading festivals, love, harmony, peace, not to light the city in blue, not to call us again terrorists glorifying individuals of the city. We have been living here, some of us, for more than 40 years. How would you feel? How would you feel if you're excluded that way? How would you feel when you send your kids to schools, public boards of schools, Catholic schools boards, and your kids are not allowed to wear their national identity with pride? This is my kufiya, this is my embroidery, and my flag I carry with me everywhere. I'm as equally Palestinian as Canadian. And I suffered, just like my parents and my grandparents suffered, wiping their identity, collectively being punished, dehumanized. We will not allow this to happen. It's like you're asking an Irish to not wear his kilt. As you're asking like an Indian woman not to wear her sari. This is my national identity, and I'm here to celebrate it. I'm here to add and enrich to the Canadian community. We are all equal. What happened to the Prime Minister's word? We are Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian, no matter what. I'm not a Canadian, second-class Canadian, and my kids are born here, and their kids will be born here. We might not have come here by choice, but we're staying here by choice. So what I want from you, if you get the message across, in addition to everything that has been mentioned so far, and that's our first demand, is to end the siege, end the occupation, provide humanitarian aid, ceasefire now, unconditionally, but we also would like the Prime Minister and other officials to offer those letters of support and help to their entire community to write and publicly speak about denouncing anti-Palestinian racism. There is no such, we should not allow such act to be part of our society here in Canada. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Habib. We'll now have Farah speak on behalf of the Palestinian community as well.
Good morning.
Identify yourself by name and spell your names too, please. It's hard to.
No worries. My name is Farah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Canadian Palestinian. I was born in Gaza, but Canada has been my home for more than half of my life. I come from a family of resilient dreamers, a family of displaced refugees on one side and native farmers on the other, turned architects, designers, educators, healthcare providers, and storytellers. A family, like all families, that loves life and cherishes their land. In December of 2006, my family made the ultimate sacrifice to secure a vibrant future for my siblings and I, leaving behind the life we knew by choosing to migrate to Canada and make this country our home under the premise that everyone is welcome here, everyone. A few days since landing here, the borders along Gaza were sealed shut indefinitely as a precursor to what has now been a 16-year-long blockade. I am one of the lucky ones. Since then, Gaza has been subjected to an unrelenting siege riddled with deadly massacres and suffocating, dehumanizing restrictions by Israel, crippling its economy and restricting all movement by land, air, and sea. Countless violations against international law have been committed by Israel, imposing horror after horror with impunity. Human rights workers, journalists, and medical personnel have been categorically targeted and killed. Gaza's water and agricultural lands have been purposely poisoned and contaminated. Israel has seen fit to put Gaza on a diet, controlling the caloric intake of the over 2 million residents of the Gaza Strip, half of which are children. to keep its populace malnourished. Let the scope of what this alone means sensitize you. Since 2007, the hospital I was born in, where I drew my first breath in this world, has been reduced to rubble. The school I attended, where I learned my ABCs, has been flattened. The neighborhood I grew up in is now no longer recognizable. I've had to mourn family and friends from afar. My childhood memories have become a eulogy. Not a moment goes by where I do not have to contend with the grief and guilt of my privileged position, while other Palestinians, including my family, don't know if they'll wake up tomorrow. I don't wish to be here. I don't relish this position. I don't wish to repeat and recount statistics and realities that we all know, proof of which is readily accessible and undeniable. To say the narratives that have emerged in the last few weeks by our government and media groups have been a disappointment is an understatement. Incendiary headlines and misleading narratives have given way to rising xenophobia and fear amongst Canadians. The relentless abuses, doxing, and alienation fellow Canadians have been forced to experience has shattered our faith in our representing governing body, further perpetuated by our media that has deliberately undermined our rights to free speech and protesting by wrongfully construing our cause. It is a profound betrayal seeing how the voices of thousands of Canadians from all walks of life that stand in solidarity with Palestinians has been so callously warped, manipulated, and dismissed, even as accredited human rights organizations from across the world stage, including Israeli ones, have documented for decades the disparities, injustices, and breaches of human rights laws that are embedded in the daily realities of Palestinians as they are ethnically cleansed from their homeland. The last few weeks have only shown a concentrated microcosm of the abuses Palestinians have endured for 75 years. We have seen unrelenting devastation and loss of human life, and it is shameful that rather than championing the collective voice of the thousands of Canadians coming from all creeds, ethnic groups, and backgrounds, calling for an immediate ceasefire and access to humanitarian aid for the people of Gaza, we instead bear witness to Canada's complacency, which in turn has made it complicit in the actions of Israel as it kills, maims, imprisons, silences, harasses, and displaces countless civilians in the Gaza Strip and across occupied Palestine. Mothers are not being afforded a moment to bury their children. Fathers are having to collect pieces of their babies' body parts in bags. Kids are having to write their names on their limbs in hopes that they'll be identified, amidst the carnage being rained down upon them. Entire family lines have been rendered extinct. If I could write all their names on my body, my skin would drown in ink. Canada's bilateral relationship with Israel comes with the moral responsibility to hold its ally responsible for its desecration of international human rights and humanitarian law. This is not a matter of taking sides, but of addressing the fundamental rights and dignity of a people deserving of peace, liberation, prosperity, and most certainly worthy of life. We have an obligation to tell the truth, to distinguish between the occupier and the occupied, and protect the sanctity of human life. Otherwise, we incur a debt against our moral conscience. We cannot afford the price that the Palestinians never consented to pay. I am not alone in my sentiments. My outrage and demands belong to a diverse collective of fellow Canadians, and our voice is vast and enduring as we continue to speak for the people of Palestine. Calling for a ceasefire is the very bare minimum that Canada can do.
Thank you, Farah. I'll now have Imam Sikander come up and speak.
We have 15 minutes left for this.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Imam Sikander Hashmi, Sikander Hashmi. I serve as an imam here in Ottawa. Today I'm speaking on behalf of Canadian Muslims. Imagine the city of Toronto was bombed nonstop, 24/7 for the past 3 weeks. Imagine if no Torontonian was allowed to leave. Imagine if all of Toronto's residents were forced into an area smaller than Scarborough with bombed out roads and collapsed buildings everywhere. Imagine if all supermarkets in that area were empty and you had to spend hours searching for a single loaf of bread. Imagine if through all of this, there was no electricity and barely any water. Imagine if through all of this, the number of children killed in Toronto was higher than the number of people killed on 9/11. Imagine on top of that, the same number of adults were also killed in Toronto in the last 3 weeks. This is the reality the people of Gaza are living right now. I'd like to ask the Prime Minister, Cabinet, and his fellow world leaders, with respect, when is your conscience going to wake up? When are you going to be unable to sleep at night? When are you going to call for an immediate ceasefire? Who is holding you back? Your silence and inaction is shouting out loud that our blood and pain are worthless. Homes, schools, hospitals, mosques, even one of the oldest churches in the world, the Greek Orthodox Church of St. Porphyrius in Gaza, were hit by Israeli airstrikes. The church was sheltering Christians and Muslims, many of whom were killed. Every morning at my mosque, when I'm there to lead prayers, I see community members who have family members living through the horrors happening right now in Gaza. Every morning we pray, and when we're walking out, we ask how they're doing. A few days ago, I learned that Ali had lost 22 family members in Gaza. Uncles, aunts, everyone, children, women, grandparents, men. This morning, his children's school is wondering how to offer support to the family. These are not isolated incidents. Across Canada, there are families in grief, and their pain is linked to the abject failure of the international community. Sadly, Canada stands in shame today for allowing this travesty of justice to continue. We needed an immediate ceasefire 2 weeks ago to stop the death and destruction, and we need one even more today, right now. Vivian Silver was born in Winnipeg. She's 74 and an Israeli peace activist. She is believed to be one of the hostages currently in Gaza, along with possibly 200 others. Canadian media reports have her son as saying, quote, "My basic belief is that military actions don't solve anything," end quote. And then he goes on, and I quote once again, "The attack on October 7th, it was vicious and really brutal, but it happened in a certain context of this region of years and years of dehumanizing people from both sides," end quote. Sadly, we see that dehumanization and its effects playing out right now. So, Mr. Prime Minister, please speak up to protect the lives of innocent civilians. There are other Canadians trapped in Gaza as well. The horrible death and destruction being inflicted upon the people of Gaza is not helping bring any Canadian home. My friend Eamon in Sherbrooke, Quebec, writes, "This morning I spoke to my cousin after 4 days of being disconnected because he couldn't charge his phone in Gaza. He has 2 beautiful children, 7 and 8 years old. He also has a mom, who is Ayman's aunt. His wife has multiple sclerosis, a debilitating disease. Yesterday, he spent 4 hours cycling on rough, demolished roads of Gaza to find a loaf of bread. When he found one, he told me, he felt like he was carrying $1 million. He was overcome with joy as he was walking home to feed his mom, 2 children, and wife with this loaf of bread. His wife has been without medicine for 2 weeks. Can you imagine how inhumane this is? Now imagine that this was intentionally done by Israel. This is not just the dictionary definition of collective punishment, this is genocide. Do you not see terrorism in these brutal, ruthless, inhumane actions?" This was Eamon's post. I believe we all want peace. Peace will never emerge from the atrocities being committed right now in Gaza. So, Mr. Prime Minister, I hope you will take inspiration from past leaders like Prime Ministers Lester B. Pearson and Jean Chrétien. Speak up, stand up for what is right. You and other world leaders have the power to save lives. As at Muslim Life Canada in Instagram aptly stated, if you've ever wondered what you would have done during the slave trade, during the Holocaust and civil rights movement, you are doing it right now. We need a ceasefire. Now. Please. Thank you.
On now take questions.
Je comprends que vous parlez français, hein? Is anyone speak French?
Unfortunately.
No, okay. no, this was a question.
Just wondering if anyone could speak to the sort of argument that we often hear from Israelis that a ceasefire would just give more time to Hamas to gear up for the types of actions it's been doing.
So I'll let everyone speak to this a little bit. We've seen comments that, a ceasefire will not be viable. However, simply stated, the solution, if not a ceasefire, is not to continue bombarding a civilian population, is not to add another 8,000 civilian deaths over the next 2-3 weeks, making it 16,000. The solution is not slaughtering another over almost 3,000 kids in a matter of 3 weeks.
That's before the internet was interrupted.
Before the internet was interrupted. We know that the Israeli government has said that not only are they going to continue their actions, but they're going to escalate them as well. And we've seen the footage, we've seen the pictures. I don't know if they realize this, but if you're not going to call for a ceasefire, then what is the solution? I'll let Habib speak. Go ahead.
I think what would help is imagery. Like if you need to imagine Gaza. Gaza is literally the size of Gatineau Park. Here's my French to you today. Gatineau Park is Gaza with 2.2 million inhabitants in Gatineau Park, 50% of which are children. So if you allow this to continue to happen, we're wiping Gatineau Park off the face of Quebec. That's what's happening right now. That does not give Israel the right to enter and bombard an area that's this size with that many inhabitants inside of it.
Thank you. And I was just also wondering, there's been some controversy over a flag in Toronto. Hamas flag was widely photographed, and I guess I'm just wondering, there's some rhetoric about that this should be something that's banned in Canada. It appears that's not really something we ban in Canada, the flying of a certain flag. I'm not asking you to justify that action, but I'm wondering if you could just give us some context around what does that flag mean, and how should we be thinking about that sort of thing at a rally like that?
Flat out, we're not here to speak on behalf of Hamas. We are not spokesperson for Hamas. We're not here to advocate for any certain flag being flown. What we're here to talk about is ending the murder of civilian life. That's it. Any person whether this footage has come out in a Toronto rally, any sort of rally, we can't speak to that. But what we can speak at the rallies across Canada, across the world, that people have been saying, stop bombing hospitals, stop bombing children, stop killing children, stop calling atrocity, stop the genocide. That's what the main message, the primary, and essentially really the only message that's been present at these rallies. We can't really speak to any sort of flags or claims that different flags are being flown. I don't know if anyone else like to speak to this.
I mean, you covered it exactly well. I mean, and you're very well aware of, when there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people across the country going out, we cannot control everybody's action. Our message that gets across to people and as organizers, if we are involved in organizing a rally, is that none of that should be there, because it does not, one, represent how we feel, but people are entitled to their own sentiments, to their own, but it's a large crowd. We cannot go and control every single person and what they do within the numbers that are present. Just one more thing that I wanted to mention, because I'm in a person, of course, all the imagery that my fellow commanders here talked about today. I was just sitting with some of the Palestinian Christians' family yesterday over a dinner just to lighten up their lives. They have been literally in anticipation by the phone or any communication of when our parents are going to die. Actually, their parents are wishing to be dead, to be relieved. Like one of my friend's dad, he would look around and say, why do I need to go out and live? This neighbor with 20 people from the family is dead. This, my childhood friend and all his entire family is dead. This neighbor is dead. I haven't taken a shower in 23 days. I haven't eaten. I haven't drank. I witnessed the deaths of 17 people into the third oldest church in the world. As a refugee, as a refuge, as a sanctuary, as a place where people go to seek shelter. Shelter has been bombed. what else can you ask for? What kind of life you want? If this is fair, if this is something that should not be defended, if there's no reason for a ceasefire, then think about this. And think, how would your family and what would you want for your family to experience and live?
You said earlier, like, humanitarian pauses will be like a coffee break. You don't think it's a good start for Canada, for Minister Joly to ask for this kind of truce?
No, absolutely. To be clear, we're grateful for, any sort of humanitarian pause. However, let's be frank here, a humanitarian pause will only allow for aid to come in and then shortly after resume the bombardment. Let's be practical. Is this a realistic expectation of what they should have? Not to mention the fact that the aid promised to Gaza is not even sufficient. It's not sufficient to recover all the damage that has been done. You have neighborhoods decimated, hospitals decimated. The city is literally on the brink of collapse, if it already did not collapse. So we're grateful for the call to a humanitarian pause. However, we need to see more. We can't have, a 24-hour pause and then, everyone gets back to being butchered.
I have a question about if Canada does call for a ceasefire, if a ceasefire is able to be negotiated through other parties. I mean, what happens after that? I mean, what kind of path forward do you see for Gaza and Israel once a ceasefire is even reached?
So once a ceasefire is reached, I think that's a bridge that governments need to cross. Canada with its allies, Israel and so on and so forth, should cross. But let's just get to a ceasefire first. Let's establish the fact that murdering civilians with impunity is wrong. Let's establish that fact, and we haven't really seen much action from the government to condemn it. And instead, they're giving unequivocal support to the Israeli government to do as it pleases. Similarly, in terms of future actions, Canada needs to, as we said in our calls, Canada needs to reevaluate its decision in acknowledging, recognizing the ICC's jurisdiction, investigating the Israeli government for war crimes. There is a plethora of actions that can be taken that can secure peace in the future. But as of right now, we're talking about step 5 and 6 when we can't even get past step 1, which is calling for the end to the violence against innocent civilians.
But is a ceasefire going to happen if, I just see so many calls, there's so many people out in the streets who are so passionate for their communities, and we see all of this, these images that you've been describing and how your community feels in Gaza. So I would just love to know, even just on a personal level, what do you want to see as a future for these two countries or two territories?
As someone who was born and raised back home, as someone who can speak to the vigor for life and aspirations of my fellow Palestinians, when a ceasefire is called, that's really just the first step in a long, long process that needs a lot of commitment from the global stage. Anyone who says that they champion human rights and peace and liberty for all has to be committed to working towards the liberation, the peace, and the prosperity of the Palestinian people, and treating them with the same equity and dignity that all people are deserving of. Gaza has been under a blockade for 16 years. I've tried to recount only a few examples of the devastation that they've had to endure time and time again. The blockade needs to be lifted. Access for people to be able to move in and out of Gaza needs to be enabled. People have to have resources, because at the end of the day, Gazans, they don't want to be a charity case. We don't want to be just constantly relying on humanitarian aid. We want prosperity for ourselves. We want to be able to make lives for ourselves. We have those dreams. We have those ambitions. More than half of Gaza's population has an undergraduate degree, even more so have graduate degrees. We are an educated people, but we've been denied time and time and time again from the ability to just live peacefully, to live reasonably, to have the ability to have opportunities because of the simple fact that we are Palestinians, that were born in a specific area. That's my hope. That's I think the long-term vision that I would like to see for my people one day, but it does start with a ceasefire, and then the work has to begin from there. Thank you.
I do have a question because I find, it's great to talk to people who have links back to Gaza. If you don't mind my final question, I mean, as you're talking about what you want to see moving forward, Israel says, they want to eradicate Hamas. That's their message, right? Is that something that you, as a Gazan or with family back there, is that something that you want to see as well or think is necessary?
My family and I were not associated with Hamas. I do not represent Hamas. I do not speak for them either. I think what's important to realize is that any resistant groups that have emerged from the area are not born in a vacuum. Hamas was funded by Israel when it was first founded. Again, not justifying any of their actions. I do not speak for them. But ultimately, what we need to realize is that when people are sequestered into what's now being called a concentration camp, for all those years, generations after generations being forced to have to be brought up in that environment, you have to understand that extreme environments will breed extreme reactions. So the solution to dismantling any sort of resistance groups or whatnot starts with working towards peace and liberty for our people so that they don't have to find it necessary to go to these extreme lengths to be heard or to attempt to, enable their own liberation. That's what has to be focused on, right? These things are not born just in a vacuum, and I have to keep emphasizing that.
My intention was not in that question to
I understand.
associate you with any
I appreciate that
at all.
Thank
so.
you.
You good?
Yeah.
This is coming to Paul.
We need your name.
My name is Habib. His first name Habib. Sorry, Habib.
B
And last name is Khoury. Khoury.
R Y.
And if you want to know what it means, it's beloved priest. Literally.
This concludes this press conference. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, my intention, I hope that wasn't taken in.
No.
I really